So I'm going to share my story for about 20 minutes, and then you have the opportunity to ask me any questions that you want. Please ask me whatever questions you want. You're not going to cause any trouble. People are always shy when it comes to asking questions, but I'll challenge you to be bold, and you can ask me anything you want. So use it as an opportunity to dig into any part of my life. When it comes to things like domestic abuse, the effects are on every part of your life, and it expresses itself as an adult in every part of your life. So nothing's out of the ballpark when it comes to questions. So please, whatever might help you in your roles, please feel free to ask. So on the 19th of July 2016, my father shot and killed my mum Claire and my 19-year-old sister Charlotte in broad daylight with a shotgun, and he then killed himself. The murders occurred in our hometown in Lincolnshire in the car park of a swimming pool one morning. My younger brother Ryan and I only survived the attack because we were both working abroad at the time of the murders. Just 5 days before our father shot and killed Mum and Charlotte, Ryan and I had moved them both out of the family house into a small rental house that was just a few miles away in a nearby town. Our dad had always made it very clear to us that we made his life miserable, and we believed that by giving Mum and Charlotte a separate place to live, then finally we could all live in peace. But we were wrong. And then just days after the murders, we witnessed a national media commentary which complimented our dad. Despite the murders, there were many who chose to insist that he was somehow a nice guy who apparently was always caring. He was even described as a good man, and one report described murdering Mum as understandable. In fact, we witnessed an outpouring of sympathy for male mental health issues. And altogether, it became very clear that this was being reported as our dad's suicide, not the murders of Mum and Charlotte, who were merely seen as props in his story. Our father, despite what he had done, was presented as the victim. He got the sympathy for what he chose to do, and we were left with the accountability for what he did to us. And the media reporting shocked us precisely because it read as if our dad was still writing it. It was all from his perspective and all telling his story rather than telling Mum's and Charlotte's. For instance, the media kept referring to our dad's suicide note that he'd left behind at the scene, rather than the murder note that Mum and Charlotte would have called it instead. Additionally, the media chose to tell a story where everything was fine until a family breakdown suddenly and an emotional loss of control 5 days later that resulted in murders. So that was all there was to it. But that was our father's story. Our story wasn't 5 years, 5 days. Our story was 25 years of struggle to finally become free. My brother Ryan and I became aware of just how dangerous these media narratives are when it was uncovered in the police investigation that our father had actually been searching for reports of men who killed their families for months before he then killed ours. And our father had seen the media justifying the actions of these previous murderers. And this empowered him to create his own murder note with exactly the same justifications to kill all of us that he'd copied from those reports he'd seen online. But despite the man that my dad was, growing up, I'd never even identified as a victim of domestic abuse, and I didn't realise that we were in any physical danger from our father. I'd always seen him as selfish, as emotionally immature, and as cold, but I'd never seen him as physically dangerous. When we were very young, he'd mostly neglected us. None of us had any distinct memories of him spending quality time with us, reading to us, teaching us, or really taking an interest in us at all. It seemed he was only really interested in keeping Mum's attention squarely focused on him. And it very clearly upset him whenever Mum's attention was anywhere else but him, particularly towards her children. And so we never really felt that our dad was glad that we were there. We felt that our lives were mostly an inconvenience. And so we did everything we could to diminish ourselves, suppress our needs as much as we could, and try not to cause any unnecessary disturbances. We lived as if we weren't there, so that no one would notice us and become irritated by our existence. And so feeling that we had to look after ourselves, we worked hard as children in the hope that we could create a happier life for ourselves one day. Ryan, Charlotte and I were all very successful at school. We were overachieving, we were obedient and we were diligent. Our dad didn't seem to be particularly happy with our successes though. In fact, the more we succeeded, the more he seemed to be threatened by our growing intelligence. He didn't seem to see us as children to be nurtured into our fullness. Instead, he saw us as competition to be suppressed, likely because he was afraid that one day his behaviour might lead us to revolt against his tyranny when we came of age. But given our educational successes, it appeared to us and to everyone else that we were living an ordinary life. We often gave our dad the benefit of the doubt because it seemed that despite what was going on, his behaviour wasn't holding us back that much. Maybe things weren't so bad after all. It was only after the murders that we began to understand just how deeply his behaviour had altered all of us. For example, we were so overly compliant at school because we'd all become so terrified of displeasing our arbitrary and harsh father at home. We were such overachievers because we felt the responsibility to provide for ourselves. And so our successes weren't indications that everything was okay at home. They were in fact the exact opposite. Our successes were the desperate last attempts of despairing children to escape the relentless stress and pressure back home. Our life had always looked very different on the surface to how it felt underneath. Despite the man that we endured at home, our dad was often excessively friendly to others. It wasn't that he didn't know how he was supposed to behave. He certainly knew and he could pull it off brilliantly when he needed to, but only when it seemed to benefit him. And when it wasn't useful for him to behave well, he would simply behave however he wanted to. One of the main ways that our dad exerted control over our family was relentless financial control. He kept Mum poor, for example, so she could never survive away from him. He would often be careless with whatever money we did have, gambling it away online, disappearing on holidays by himself, not telling us where he's going or when he'd return, and giving savings away to people online that he'd never met while Ryan and I were at university, building up debt. Our dad was obsessive about money, and he decided entirely how the money was to be spent in our family. Mum only ever had enough money to buy the bare minimum necessities for us children. And even then, he would check receipts to make sure that she hadn't been wasting money elsewhere or trying to save money for herself. And our lack of finances gave our dad the perfect excuse to restrict every part of our lives and always to pin the blame elsewhere. It was never his fault. For example, he would often complain that we couldn't afford the fuel in the car to go out and engage in activities because maybe his boss hadn't paid him on time. And so we cancelled our plans. And he complained often enough that it seemed futile to even make plans in the first place. And because we heard him complain about money so often, over time we came to believe that our problems were caused by poverty, even our dad's behaviour. It was true that we couldn't afford to do many things. But what we failed to realise was that he was often using this narrative and reality of poverty to control us and reduce us to passivity. And after his financial control shut the outside world off, he then managed to stop Mum from having friends over by simply making them so uncomfortable and awkward that people simply decided to stop of their own free will from even meeting up. But despite thinking that we were making these decisions to restrict our own lives, our dad was always behind the scenes, always architecting situations. So everything we tried to do was so utterly miserable, we'd simply give up and stop making plans in the first place. Eventually, his control extended like tentacles into every part of our daily lives. Any mistake that he made was fundamentally our mistake. For example, if he dropped a plate, the next moment he was screaming at us because we hadn't stacked them properly. And he often couldn't articulate his needs and was furious that he was even expected to do so. If something was upsetting him, he would expect us all to drop whatever we were doing and solve it for him. For example, if he'd not lost a notepad, we were all expected to run frantically around the house and find it for him, while he sat on the sofa, angrily barking frustrated and incoherent orders at us. We were always on tenterhooks. Our whole lives revolved around his current state of irritation. There were many times that we found our dad's behaviour completely unreasonable, but we also learned that we couldn't speak the truth or challenge him without him self-destructively escalating the situation and making it worse for all of us, including himself. We all had a deep sense that our father was willing, even wanted, to go to hell and was looking for any opportunity to take us with him. And so the only way that we learned to keep life manageable was to become passive and invisible. We simply couldn't make our present circumstances better, so instead we got our heads down and planned for a better future. We learned to anticipate our dad's needs so well that we ended up giving up parts of our lives without even realising we were doing it. It was now automatic, and he didn't even have to demand it. Why fight battles you know you will lose? Why not just give up in the first place and avoid all the hassle? Over time, our home became a prison because we had internalised the abuse and adapted to it and imposed the rules upon ourselves in order to keep the peace. In trying to keep safe, we became our own prison guards. And as much as we would have wished for a better life growing up, our dad had trapped Mum in his web. Mum was under constant surveillance. Dad would demand to know all of Mum's activities and would often ring her place of work at the supermarket or physically spy on her between the shelves to check that she was where she claimed to be. In addition, Mum suffered from many health challenges, from cancer to multiple sclerosis and others, and she couldn't work more than part-time or minimum wage. Mum always knew she couldn't support 3 children by herself, and Mum's extended family couldn't help financially either. And therefore, even as young boys, Ryan and I always knew that no one was coming to save us. The only hope that we had was ourselves. We had to get our heads down. We had to work hard at school and university, save up and try to fund an escape ourselves. Eventually, in the middle of July in 2016, having worked for a few years, Ryan and I had raised enough money to begin to look after ourselves and to begin to look after our family. And so we rented a small place for Mum and Charlotte to escape to. One morning in a moving van, we managed to get Mum, Charlotte, the dogs, and key items out of the home while our dad was still at work. And as we headed over to the new home in the rental van, we thought at last Mum and Charlotte's new lives of peace lay before them. It was only 5 days later, once Ryan and I returned to our work abroad, that we were called by the police to inform us that our dad had murdered Mum and Charlotte on their way out of the local swimming pool. When Ryan and I returned home and were cleaning the house after the murders, we then discovered that our dad had been writing drafts of the murder note compiled from previous media reports, as I explained. It turned out that he had in fact been planning to kill our entire family for weeks, if not months or years, before we'd even started planning to escape. We also found a to-do list that our dad had produced in the days running up to the murders. It was so coldly ordinary given what he had in mind. It included things like buying a second-hand fridge that he knew he'd only have for a few days. And he purchased and presented a parking ticket 20 minutes before killing Mum, Charlotte, and then himself. It was evident to us that our father was functioning as he always had on that day. This wasn't a hot-headed man who suddenly lost emotional control of himself, as the media narrative had tried to claim. This was a man with cold-hearted control of even the tiniest details, as he always had been. After the murders of Mum and Charlotte, the police investigation then revealed just how much our dad had controlled Mum's life from the very moment he met her. Firstly, we discovered that he was married to another woman before he met Mum, but this had been hidden from us. It emerged that his first wife had left him very shortly after they got married, but before they'd had children together. It seemed that our dad learned an important lesson the day his first wife left, and that was that if he ever wanted to control a woman, marriage alone wouldn't be enough. First, he'd need to anchor her down with a child so she couldn't leave. So after his first wife left, and upon meeting our mum, our father flattered Mum and insisted that she throw away her contraceptive pills and have his child. I was born, and then our dad married Mum shortly afterwards. After marrying Mum, he then moved our family to an isolated, run-down farmhouse in the middle of nowhere when I was 3 years old. We lived a subsistence lifestyle off the land, pretty well cut off from the world for nearly a decade. We'd always been told by our dad that we moved to the countryside to keep me safe, because I'd had a life-threatening allergic reaction after eating food contaminated with nuts when I was young. He said that moving to the countryside would allow us to grow our own food, so I'd never eat food contaminated with nuts again. But that wasn't the true story, because the police investigation revealed from Mum's sister that something different had happened. It turned out that our dad had demanded Mum one day to leave her friends, family and work in the town they were living in and to move to the countryside with him. When Mum refused, our father calmly fed me nuts in front of her and her sister, even though it was known that I had a life-threatening nut allergy. Mum rushed me to hospital to save my life, but she couldn't prove to anyone else what our dad had just done, because to anyone else it simply looked like a small child eating something they shouldn't, which happens all the time. But our dad had done enough, because in that act he had shown Mum the consequences if she ever disobeyed any of his plans. The children would be harmed. And this threat of harming the children hung over Mum for 25 years, during which period she would obey him absolutely for our sake. Until she finally had the courage to leave once we'd all left home. And it was at this point that our dad would finally and fatally enact that threat to harm the children, when he shot and murdered Charlotte along with Mum. And so within the first 3 years of meeting Mum, Dad had created dependency, isolation and poverty in Mum's life. It was a perfect recipe to control all of her decisions, even decades later. And there never needed to be a bruise because he had hostages to exert his will over Mum. Ryan and I know how important it is to help others understand coercive control, because despite living with it for 25 years, the first time we heard of it was when we were sat in the police station just 2 days after the murders, which ironically and almost absurdly was covered in posters about a new law that just passed on coercive control. And as we looked up around us, in utter bewilderment, we saw our entire lives plastered across the wall with these posters. Up until this point, we'd never been able to articulate what was happening to us, because the abuse that we suffered wasn't stereotypical, it wasn't a series of discrete violent incidents that we could present to the police. What we suffered was much more like a million small pinpricks that eventually stole our lives from us. The question that we'd always needed to be asked, but weren't, was what can't you do? Because the harms of the abuse were the freedoms that it stole from us. If we'd ever been asked what we couldn't do, then everything would have spilled out. But since we never understood the significance of coercive controlling behaviours growing up, at first Ryan and I simply couldn't understand how the murders of Mum and Charlotte had seemed to have come out of nowhere. We'd always thought that domestic abuse was only about violence, but in our case the violence all came at once. It was only when we saw those posters on coercive control that we understood for the first time that domestic abuse is fundamentally about controlling others. Violence is only one means of achieving that control, and in many cases like ours, it's the final and fatal means of gaining control. Abusers often don't want to be violent, they just want to control you. And often they'd rather gain control without violence. Who wants to be violent and look like a bad person after all? In the weeks after that realization, everything began to click into place. And finally we realized for the first time in our lives that we had been suffering domestic abuse for decades. As I said, we began to understand that coercive control isn't understood by asking what's done to you, but by asking what's been taken away from you as a victim. The evidence of coercive control isn't what's present. It's not things like bruises and broken bones. The evidence is what's absent from the victims' lives. It's the potentials and the freedoms that they've lost. It's the smallness of their lives. It's constantly being haunted by the ghost of the life that was stolen from you. Coercive control is much closer to kidnapping than it is a series of violent incidents. And so our dad's behaviour had made us all hostages in our own home. It's often difficult to acknowledge the pain of what we've never had or of what we've lost. But in recently becoming a father to a son myself, I had to acknowledge what I'd always hid from. That despite thinking I was strong enough to deal with it all, I had to acknowledge that I always needed a father to love me, to teach me how to be a man, how to be a father myself one day, how to treat women properly, and to discipline me in how to live and to work and to love. But I never received those things, and that left a big grieving wound. It took me many decades to acknowledge. And Ryan and I have often reflected on just how unfortunate we were that our dad was the man that he was. No matter what happened, it seemed, good or bad, life only ever seemed to make him more selfish and more bitter. Yet even more, we reflect gratefully that Mum and Charlotte were the women that they were, because they showed us that no matter what life brings, whether good or evil, it's always possible to choose to respond with love. It's become clear to me through the struggles of my life that relationships are the hardest things that we do as human beings, but also that love is the medicine that we all need. It's the purpose of all of our lives, and it's the most noble feat that any of us are capable of. And it was the examples of Mum and Charlotte that set a spark of light in me that eventually led me to healing, to finding faith in Jesus after trying everything else that wouldn't work. And finally, I found peace. So thank you. So now you can ask me whatever you want. So it's, the ball's in your court. So as I said, please be brave, and I'm happy to answer anything.
Can I ask you something?
Oh.
Of course, you know, this story, I would be very, I would like to understand what did you do after? How did you feel? Which emotion did you have? How did you come out of it?
Yeah, so I think, well, I was talking with Aubrey about this over lunch, but so we saw in the presentation earlier, you know, help seeking is a big thing for children. Well, one of the things you learn when growing up in abusive environments is it's not safe to seek help. But like if you show weakness, you're in trouble. You know, like with an abuser, if you show vulnerability, they go in for the kill, right? Like normally you show vulnerability, people come into love, but that's not the case with abuse. You show vulnerability and they'll come in for the finish off. So you have to learn to hide it, you have to learn to bury it, you have to learn to look after yourself, you have to learn it's not safe to seek help. Because that's how you keep yourself safe. So after doing that for many, many years, you harden up, actually. And I became superficially very disciplined, very resilient, all the things that you would expect, almost sort of strangely so. People would be like, oh, he's so resilient. But my heart was brittle, right? Like it was holding together, but it was brittle. Like it needed one more, and the whole thing. So I was, after the murders, if I'm honest, I was strangely still numb. Like it's really hard to, I mean, something like that is unreal, like if I'm honest as well. When that's happened to you and you don't even know that you've been suffering domestic abuse, it just feels like you're in a movie or something, or it's all a joke, you know? It's like, I could forget what the film is, but where that guy is living in a little world and it's all filmed, right? It felt like that. It's like someone's gonna lift the veil and everyone's like, oh, it's not TV or something, you know, like it's not real life, this isn't real. It just seemed totally real, like unreal, and I couldn't ground myself, to be honest. And I felt like I was just floating off into space almost, like the world was spinning and I just drifted away. So for a long time, there was a lot of depersonalization, a lot of just cold numbness, so just too much to process. I couldn't connect to it. Like all of that, all at once, it's like, where do you begin? Like it just sort of was over there and I was over here and there was a gulf between. So, my younger brother, he's different than me, as we heard. Children going to be parents very different. My brother's always been more emotional, and we had our two dogs. So for me, I just did what I always did as a big brother. You know, as a big brother, I felt the void more, and I felt the necessity to try and step into it as a child because I was the eldest, and obviously I did a terrible job at trying to be an adult and a dad when I was a kid, but I tried, I guess. Sort of intuition, isn't it? So when that happened, and having a brother and dogs, the intuition was to step up, try and look after everyone else, So I kind of went into this sort of numb, parenting, caring phase. But I also learned that the best way that you heal your own wounds is try and love others. You know, like it's almost the way that you heal your own heart is to try and love someone else. And it's almost like you give the love and it sort of primes the pump and sort of draws more love into your heart. And the love itself heals you. So like when you're hurt, paradoxically, loving other people heals you, you know? It's a really strange thing, because I thought, I need someone to love me, right? I was broke, I didn't have anyone. Often when these things happen, you reach out to family, it's like, oh gosh, it's me and my brother, like, they're not to reach out to. And my brother was traumatized, and just There's no one, you know? So it was really difficult. And I spent a lot of time just trying to manage, trying to carry it, trying to be the rock like I'd always try to be. And that held for a while until probably these things often, there's normally like a period of 3 or 4 years where this sort of thing happens, people kind of patch it up, and then eventually it percolates out and then it erupts. And for me, it was probably about 4 or 5 years later, living and just finding like I'm grinding down, like everything's just turning to dust, right? And I'm trying to work, trying to manage myself, and just like, there's nothing left, just nothing left. And then fate, providence, whatever, I was dating and a girl, I was only dating for a couple of months, got pregnant. And that was just I was just overwhelmed. And she's from Canada as well, right? She wasn't English citizen. So I was like, you idiot. You've got no family, you don't know how to be a dad, you don't know how to be a man. The relationship wasn't going to last, and it wasn't. It was just a dating relationship, and we weren't suitable for long-term partners. So it was like, you're going to probably lose the kid, like, you idiot. And suddenly, like, I was just about functioning. And then when I realized, like, now you've got this responsibility, and you're totally unqualified to be a man or a dad or anything, it just shattered. Like, I just totally shattered. And that was when, like, I tried out to study philosophy, I studied all religions, I studied psychology, I studied everything, trying to heal myself, right? And it doesn't matter what you think. I mean, CBT is a big thing. You can't think yourself out of the problem, you have to grow out of it, right? And the only way you can grow out of it is to stop trying to control it, right? Like, and I was always trying to be smarter than the problems, predict them, and get on top of them and contain them. And sometimes life is too much. You can't think outsmart it, you know? And I believe in God now. I grew up atheist, but when that happened, I just from the bottom of my heart called out, like, God, if you're real, please. Like, I'm ruined, I've ruined my life. Like, and my life changed from that point. Things happened, really magnificent, crazy things that I couldn't even begin to explain. But I was just broken. And I was like, I'm finished. I've got a son. And I have to be something for him, not just ground dirt, like I'm nothing. And that forced me to deal with it all. And it erupted out of me in a way I can't explain. So like, we heard as well, the body keeps the score. One thing you learn is that you're not just randomly sick. When we're sick in a particular way for a particular reason, right? So one thing I often say is that women who suffer domestic abuse have really high rates of autoimmune conditions, really high rates, much higher than the general population. Well, why is it? Well, because when you're suffering in that environment, you're repressing all your emotions and they attack you. Your anger and all that is turned in on you, so it's not safe to express it. That's a spiritual reality. The physical analogy is your immune system is attacking your actual nerves, right? I used to struggle with kidney pain, agonizing kidney pain. What do your kidneys do? They process physical toxins out of your body. I was being the externalized garbage bag, people projecting their emotions into me. I was being the emotional dialysis machine for other people. I was spiritually processing their sicknesses for them. It was overwhelming me. All of my sicknesses, I started to realize, these are all spiritually grounded, right? But when I finally let go, I couldn't hold it together anymore. I got so incredibly sick, it wiped me out for about a couple of years before I couldn't work, couldn't do anything. And I realized that what I'd been doing was containing sicknesses in different parts of my body, in my gut, my shoulder, my kidneys, and like anywhere except my heart. The one place I wouldn't feel anything because I knew it was just so painful. Right? I was like, don't feel this because it will destroy you. And it was all every part of my body, my jaw, my neck, my back, and then when I was just broken, it erupted. I started losing teeth, and all kinds of things, everything. And I learned, if I'm honest, that if you let go, I was worried if you let go, you go mad. If you suffered this kind of stuff and you let go, you're going to be seeing things, you're going to be losing, right? Your breath is finished. And it surprised me that I let go, and then just love, like the most profound divine love caught me, right? In the middle of an abyss, basically. And I was like, oh my God, this is true. Like, this is all, I just couldn't begin to explain it. But I thought I was done, right? So my life was trying to hold it, bang, fall into an abyss, and then kind of lift it out of it, you know? So it's very, very hard to explain, but a lot of people will do the same thing. They'll try and manage, they'll try and cope, they'll try and function, they'll try and hold their responsibilities, and they just accumulate in their body. And a lot of it is just coping. Like people lying to themselves, I'm fine, until you just bang, it goes. So it's been a very, very long journey, but I've learned that ultimately, you have to let go, and you have to admit to yourself, like like I said in the speech, I always thought, I'm fine. I didn't have a dad, but I'm fine. I'll do all right. You know, I can manage it. I'm tough. I'll figure it. But I'm a human being. Like, I needed a dad. Like, I needed a mum. I needed love. I needed all these things. And I didn't have them. And there's no amount of strength that takes that away. You still need it. Even if you're a fully grown man, a part is missing. You're not whole. You're like some part is broken. And it's like, you sort of think, I don't need to go back to that. I'm functioning fine. But I've actually learned that every part of being a human being needs to be healed. You know, like even you need everything. And actually the hard thing with life is like to live with the grief. Actually I did need that, I didn't have it. And that's really tough. But you can heal. It's just, for me I needed faith. I couldn't heal myself, right? I had to have something else heal me. And that's what did it in the end. You got any more time for questions or? Okay.
What would be your message to all the men out there, all the fathers out there who wield that regime of power and control in their families and their relationships?
Well, I guess one thing is you're gonna drive your kids to revolt against you. I mean, there's many myths. If you go back like Greek myths, for example, the Greek myths are hilarious because it's like, you know, you have Kronos as the first god, and then sort of represses his kids, and they Saturn revolt against him, and then each of Zeus revolts against him. Like, there's a pattern of an oppressive father and a revolution of the children, an oppressive father. That's what happens. If you repress and oppress your kids, they'll revolt against you. And also, the thing is as well, I think as men, it's hard to admit, I struggled with vulnerability, like a lot, you know? Because the thing I struggled with was, I'm a man. Like, I want to look after people. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. I want to be useful. Like, I don't want to be a little kid, women have to look after me or whatever. I was like, who's going to look after me? Like, I need love. I need care. And I think it's hard for men to admit that, because it's emasculating, it's humiliating, it's really difficult. The only thing that helped me, because I couldn't find a solution to it, was, again, faith. God will look after me. Like, God can love me, and I'll try and pour it out to other people. But I always felt like I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want anyone else to feel they had, like, if they do love me, great. If they don't, but I didn't want to be a burden. And I know men struggle with that. It's like, where do you draw your strength from? You know? And you don't want to be drawn out of other people like a vampire. And I just found that I tried to go without it until I ground down. And I think for a lot of men, it's just admitting, like, we're human beings and we need, even if you're a bloke, you need love, right? Like, I mean, it's built, you have a heart, like, you need love. No matter how tough you are, if you're living without it, you're not being what you're meant to be. I just think I've learned that I just have to admit that to be full human beings, we need certain things. And sometimes it's hard to admit that, but it's not weakness. And you can admit those things and still support and be useful and, you know, be a man. But I just, from my own experiences, my father was very, very afraid of those things. And we learned as children, there was certain things you couldn't say, and certain things you couldn't notice, right? It wasn't safe. And I think a lot of children grow in their home around a father who isn't capable of acknowledging their own reality. And the children know that, and they know it's not safe to say certain things, it's not safe to act certain, and it just represses their children incidentally, even if it's not on purpose. And often all the kids want is just to connect with a dad. They don't need a dad to be a sumo wrestler or MMA fighter or whatever. They just, I want to love my dad and be loved by my dad. That's all kids want. They don't need the dad to be a superhero and fighting off baddies. But we just sort of think that's what men have to be. So yeah, I just try and tell men to just talk about things and just try to happen. I think we've got a few more minutes, but I don't think there are more questions.
Yeah, it's a hypothetical question, so apologies for that. But I suppose I'm curious to know that if you had had the vocabulary, the concepts, at any point before the murders happened, that this is domestic abuse, this is coercive control, this is a recognised pattern of behaviour, what might have been different? What would that have meant?
Well, it might, I think obviously a bit of knowledge will help. The challenge is these things are incredibly hard to escape as well, right? So sometimes, like in a way, I'm grateful. My mum didn't involve us in any of it. She protected us from all of it, right? Everything's fine, just focus on school, whatever. And in a way, I'm grateful for that because, like, more knowledge might well have just overwhelmed me. Like, oh my gosh, we're not safe. I already felt it, right? Like, but to be lucidly aware of it and be able to articulate but not be able to escape it would have been maybe in some ways overwhelming. It's really hard to say. I think what I would have needed, my own life now looking back, what I needed more than anything was a philosophy to cope with and deal with suffering. That's what I needed, because I was suffering like mad. And like, if I'm honest, a lot of the modern world, it's all like, smile, everything's fine, have it together. And I was like, are you all mad? Like, life seems to me evidently to be suffering and hard work. And like, no one ever talk about it. It's like they're sort of afraid of the despair or the darkness of life. I was like reading Buddhism at school and trying to make sense of like, how do I deal with this? Like, what's wrong with me? I have no coherent philosophy to deal with suffering. And what I needed more than knowledge of my environment was a way of like not being overwhelmed by it, like to productively suffer. And that's what healing is. Healing is when you find the right orientation in your own heart to suffer through it, right, without being destroyed by it. So it's controversial, but I was raised secular. I was raised completely atheist. God was never mentioned, right? It was only when I had my rock bottom, crusted dirt moment. I was like, Christianity, like, it has the cross at its center, right? I never really understood Christianity, but like, when you're suffering like mad, God on a cross suddenly makes sense. You're like, God knows it's this hard. It's not just me. Like, you know, there's something deeply touching about that I felt no one understands. Like, no one can help me. And then I saw the cross and was like, imagine if this is true. Like, God himself has suffered. He knows suffering. He knows my suffering. He's like, I don't understand it, but this is part of reality somehow. And like, somehow it needs to be. I can't make sense of it. But there was a moment where I experienced that and was suddenly able to accept it as a part of life, even though I couldn't understand it. And I was able to feel that I was understood in it, and I was able to follow. You know, like, follow me, okay, I'm suffering, so I'm going to follow you, you know how to do it. And it was only when I found that philosophy of suffering in Christianity that I actually knew what to do with it. I was able to heal. But up until that point, I was like, no, oh my gosh, you're ruined. And it was like building. I was like, oh my gosh, if this gets any higher, I'm done, right? Like, I was just trying to keep away from it. But when it all clicked, suddenly I could get through it, you know. And I remember at school, there was a story, I don't know why it stuck so much, I guess for this very reason. Maybe you remember it. There's a little book. There was always this kid coming up to a little challenge, a little obstacle, and it's always like, we can't go over it, we can't go under it, we can't go around it, we have to go through it, right? And that just kept ringing in my mind. And then I saw the cross, and I was like, I have to go through it. Like, I have to suffer. I have to go through it, and have faith and hope and trust, and that I'll get there. You know, I'll get through it. And it's this: you need philosophy to suffer through it, right? And we need to teach the kids, yeah, sure, but fundamentally, I think it's very evident children don't know how to suffer. Everyone's terrified of suffering. We live in a hedonistic society where the point of life is pleasure and purpose and comfort. And if there isn't any, then life is over. Like, if your philosophy is hedonism and you're suffering, then suicide's your only resort. Like, there's nothing else for you. Life is over. So life has to be more than just hedonism. And there isn't much there. Stoicism, Buddhism, fine. But that was me doing it myself, and I couldn't do it myself. So I just think that we need to, if I'm honest, pay a lot more attention to spiritual, religious things for children, which I think we took out, and actually we're seeing the impact that children are incapable of suffering, and they're really mentally ill because they can't suffer, actually. So that would be my advice: teach them about relationships, but teach them about all the religious traditions, and let them take the wisdom and